Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into the world of AWS.
AWS.
Which, yeah, can seem pretty intimidating, right?
It really can.
But hopefully by the end of this deep dive, we'll have at least demystified it a little bit and given you a better sense of what it's all about.
Absolutely.
And the possibilities, because there are a lot.
Yeah, there are.
So we're working from this AWS tutorial from Geeks for Geeks, which is a fantastic resource. Super thorough, tons of great information in there.
It is.
So yeah, think of us as your guides through this like massive jungle of information.
I like that. It's like we're on an expedition to try and find the hidden treasures.
Yes. And there are a lot of treasures to be found in the world of AWS. But maybe let's just back up for a second. And like for anyone who's completely new to this whole thing, when we say cloud computing,
right,
what are we even talking about? Because I think people hear cloud and they think of like, you know,
fluffy, white.
Yeah, like the weather.
Right, exactly.
But it's a little more complicated than that.
It is a bit more complicated than that. Think of it this way. You use electricity every day.
That's true, I do.
You flip a switch, the lights turn on. You don't need to own a power plant to benefit from electricity. You just plug in and pay for what you use.
Right.
Cloud computing with AWS is kind of similar. They provide all the behind-the-scenes tech stuff, servers, storage, databases, and you access it all on demand, just like electricity.
Okay, so instead of like businesses needing their own server rooms and like, you know, IT departments and all that,
exactly,
they can just kind of tap into AWS's resources whenever they need them?
Precisely. And that's where the real game changer comes in. Like the source material talks about cost efficiency, which makes sense because you're only paying for the computing power you're actually using, not a bunch of idle servers.
Right.
But it goes beyond that. It's about flexibility and scalability. Like, let's say your website suddenly gets a ton of traffic.
Okay.
Maybe your new product goes viral or you get featured on a popular blog or something.
Right.
With AWS, your website can automatically handle that surge in users without crashing.
Wow.
It's like having a restaurant kitchen that magically expands when you have a rush of customers.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like having a safety net for your business's faith. No wonder companies like Netflix and NASA rely on it.
Exactly. And the source material doesn't go into a ton of detail on those specific companies. But think about how much data Netflix processes every day with millions of users streaming movies and shows simultaneously.
It's got to be an insane amount of data.
It's massive. Or the sheer computing power that NASA needs for things like space exploration and research.
Yeah.
You know, AWS provides the backbone for them to handle all of that.
Okay, that's so interesting. So we're talking about like some really intense stuff here. This is serious tech power. What are some of the, like, I don't know, the tools that make up this AWS powerhouse? What are we even talking about here?
Yeah, so the AWS tutorial breaks down a whole bunch of different services, and it can seem a little overwhelming at first.
Sure.
But let's maybe focus on a few key categories that'll give you a sense of what's possible.
Okay.
So we've got computing power, which is basically like renting powerful virtual computers on demand. Then there's storage services for, well, storing everything from, you know, your cat photos to massive data sets.
Okay.
And then we can't forget about databases, which are all about organizing and managing information in incredibly efficient ways.
Okay, those categories make sense. So let's start with computing power, because that seems pretty central to this whole AWS thing, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
You're right. It is. Think of it this way. Instead of buying a whole bunch of expensive computers and setting up your own data center, which can be incredibly costly and complex, you can essentially just rent the exact amount of computing power you need from AWS.
Oh, okay.
And one of the most popular services for this is EC2, or Elastic Compute Cloud.
Elastic Compute Cloud. I have to say, I kind of love the name.
Yeah.
It sounds very futuristic.
It does. It does. It's a good way to think about it.
So what is it like in simple terms?
So imagine EC2 as like a massive, super-powered computer that you can slice up and use in any way you need.
Oh.
You can run websites, host applications, do complex calculations, all without worrying about the physical hardware.
So it's like instead of buying a whole loaf of bread, you're buying a slice at a time and just paying for what you need.
Exactly. And as your needs grow, you can easily buy more slices or even shrink down if needed. That's the elastic part.
Right.
It can expand and contract to fit your demands.
I'm starting to get it. Okay, so EC2 is like the workhorse of AWS. It's providing the raw computing power for all sorts of tasks. What about storage? Because that's something I feel like I can never get enough of.
You and everyone else.
Always running out.
But with AWS, you almost never have to worry about running out of storage space.
Okay.
We're talking about storing practically anything you can imagine. documents, images, videos, even entire backups of your computer systems.
Okay, that is impressive.
Yeah.
But I imagine there are like different ways to store things in the cloud, right? Just like in the real world, you have different like types of storage for different purposes.
You're spot on. The tutorial highlights two main storage services, S3 and EBS. Think of S3, which stands for Simple Storage Service, as a giant digital warehouse where you can store massive amounts of data. It's super durable, meaning your data is safe and sound, and incredibly scalable.
So S3 is like the go-to for just about anything you need to store long-term?
Pretty much. Now, EBS, or Elastic Block Storage, is a bit different. It's more about providing storage directly to those EC2 instances, those virtual computers we were talking about.
Ah, okay. So if S3 is like the massive warehouse, then EBS is more like having dedicated storage units attached to each of your virtual machines.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
EBS is all about performance and reliability. So if you have an application or a database that needs super fast access to storage, EBS is the way to go.
Okay, this is all starting to click now. We've got EC2, our virtual computers, S3 for vast general storage, and EBS for more specialized high-performance storage needs. What's next?
Databases, right?
Yes.
I'll bet that's the one that always seems a little mysterious to me.
Right.
I understand. Databases can seem a bit intimidating at first, but they're really just about organizing information in a way that makes it easy to access and use. Think of it like a
library, right?
Exactly.
But instead of books, it's filled with
data,
all sorts of information.
Yeah, customer data, product catalogs, financial records, you name it.
Okay.
A database is like that library. It stores and organizes data in a way that makes it easy to find and use.
Okay. I can picture that. But I bet there are different types of libraries for different types of information, right? Is it the same with databases?
You are exactly right.
But
The tutorial mentions traditional relational databases.
okay.
These are great for structured data, think spreadsheets with rows and columns.
Rows and columns, yeah.
Like if you were organizing a library by genre, author, and publication date, that kind of thing.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about data that's not so neat and organized that doesn't fit into those, like, neat little boxes?
Yeah.
What about things like social media posts or sensor data or even those online quizzes that tell you what kind of pizza you are based on your answers, you know?
That's where things get even more interesting. For that kind of data, which there's a lot of, by the way, you need a different approach.
Okay.
And that's where AWS services like DynamoDB come in.
Okay.
This tutorial refers to it as a non-relational database, which is kind of a mouthful,
It is a mouthful.
but it's designed to handle massive amounts of unstructured data and do it quickly.
Okay, so if a relational database is like the well-organized library, DynamoDB is more like, what, a giant searchable junk drawer?
Okay, that's one way to put it.
But like a super high-tech junk drawer
Exactly.
that can find anything in a millisecond.
Yeah, you're getting at the key difference.
Okay.
DynamoDB is built for flexibility and scale.
Right.
It can handle data that's constantly changing, growing, coming from all different sources.
Okay.
Think about a social media platform, right? Where millions of users are posting updates and photos and videos every minute.
Yeah, it's a lot.
DynamoDB can handle that kind of data onslaught without breaking a sweat.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got EC2 for computing power, we've got S3 and EBS for storage, and now we've got DynamoDB for managing these massive amounts of data.
It's all coming together.
It is all coming together. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But I do have to ask, like, how does this all come together in the real world?
Yeah.
What are some actual examples of AWS in action? Because it sounds really cool in theory, but like, what is it actually doing?
Right. That's my favorite part.
Okay.
The applications of AWS section in this tutorial is pretty mind-blowing.
Okay.
We've talked about companies like Netflix and NASA,
Right.
but it goes way beyond that.
Okay.
We're talking about everything from powering mobile apps and video games to enabling scientific research.
Wow.
And even, wait for it, helping farmers grow more food.
Hold on, farmers. Now I know you're messing with me.
Serious.
What do farms have to do with cloud computing?
There's this whole field called precision agriculture, and it relies heavily on data and technology.
Okay.
Farmers can use sensors to collect data on things like soil moisture, crop health, even weather patterns.
Yep.
And guess what they use to process and analyze all that data?
Let me guess. AWS?
Bingo. AWS provides the tools to store, analyze, and visualize that data, which helps farmers make better decisions about irrigation, fertilization, and even when to harvest their crops.
That's incredible.
It really is
It's
amazing.
like what this technology that we can't even see is having such a tangible impact on the world around us.
That's true.
Okay.
It's pretty wild.
I'm still stuck on this farming thing, I'm not gonna lie. But I'm wondering if we could maybe zoom in on a more specific example,
Yes.
just to really drive it home.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about something I know you love, mobile games.
Oh,
Yes. I'm always curious about what goes on behind the scenes of my favorite games.
so imagine you're a game developer
Okay.
and you've just created the next big mobile game sensation.
Okay. It's a hit.
Congratulations. But now you've got millions of players around the world all interacting in real time, battling it out, racking up high scores.
Right.
You need a way to handle all that data, keep the game running smoothly, and make sure your players are having a great experience.
It's a lot to manage.
That's where AWS comes in.
Okay, I'm hooked. Walk me through it.
Mm-hmm.
How does AWS help a mobile game go from, like, concept to global phenomenon?
Okay, so first, you need a place to store all the game's assets, the graphics, the music, the sound effects.
Right.
That's where S3 comes in.
Of course, our giant digital warehouse.
Exactly. Remember, it's like having a giant digital warehouse.
Right, so all those awesome graphics and soundtracks are stored securely in S3, ready to be accessed by players anytime, anywhere.
Exactly. Now, for the actual game logic, the stuff that makes the game run,
Yeah.
you'd use EC2, those virtual computers we talked about earlier.
Right.
You could set up powerful servers on EC2 to handle all the calculations, player interactions, and real-time events that are happening in the game.
So EC2 is like the brain of the operation,
Exactly.
processing all the action, making sure everything runs smoothly.
Perfectly put.
Right.
But what happens when your game becomes super popular and thousands of players are trying to log in at the same time?
Oh, no.
You don't want the game to crash or lag, right?
Of course not. That's how you lose players.
Exactly. And that's where AWS's scalability really shines.
Okay.
They have this service called auto-scaling
Oh,
that can automatically adjust your computing capacity based on demand.
Wow.
So if there's a sudden surge in players, auto-scaling can spin up more EC2 instances to handle the load
Oh, wow.
and then scale back down when things quiet down.
So it's like having a magic wand that you can wave and instantly get more computing power whenever you need it.
It's pretty close.
That is really cool. Okay, so we've got the assets stored, we've got the game logic running, and it can scale up or down as needed.
Yep.
But what about all the player data? Like their profiles, their progress, their achievements.
Right.
You've got to keep track of all that.
You need a secure and reliable way to store and manage all of that.
And I bet you're going to tell me that DynamoDB is perfect for that.
You know it. DynamoDB is built to handle massive amounts of data like this,
Okay.
and it can easily keep up with the demands of a popular mobile game.
This is all starting to make so much sense now.
Good, good.
Like, I feel like at the beginning of this, I was kind of like, what am I getting myself into?
Yeah.
But now I'm like, okay, I see the potential here.
Yeah.
But it also seems like we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, absolutely.
There's so much more to explore with AWS, isn't there?
There's so much more. This mobile game example just scratches the surface of what's possible with AWS.
Right.
We haven't even touched on things like machine learning or artificial intelligence or the Internet of Things, all of which can be powered by AWS.
It's almost like we opened up this massive toolbox.
Yeah.
And we're just starting to, like, pull out the tools and figure out what they do.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a little overwhelming, but also really exciting.
Yeah, it's true.
It really is. And, you know, it's funny because as you're talking about all this, I'm kind of realizing, I'm like, okay, this makes sense conceptually, but, like, how do you actually start doing this stuff?
Right.
Like, it feels very much like you need a computer science degree to even, like,
Sure.
dip your toes into the world of AWS.
Right, right. Well, and that's a common misconception, actually.
Okay.
You don't necessarily need a fancy degree to start learning about AWS.
Okay.
The beauty of it is that there are resources for every skill level.
Okay. That is good to hear because I was feeling a little intimidated.
Yeah.
But where do you even begin? Like, if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, this sounds really cool, I want to learn more.
Right.
Where do they go?
Well, actually, this AWS tutorial mentions something that might be right up your alley. AWS certifications.
Certifications, like a black belt in cloud computing.
Kind of. But seriously, these certifications are designed to give you practical skills and knowledge in specific areas of AWS.
Okay.
And they're a great way to kind of build credibility and demonstrate your expertise to potential employers.
So if someone's thinking about like a career in cloud computing, getting certified in AWS would be a smart move.
Absolutely. The demand for AWS skills is incredibly high right now, and certifications can give you a real leg up in the job market.
That makes total sense. But what about someone like me? Like, I'm fascinated by this stuff, but I'm not necessarily looking to become a cloud computing expert.
Sure.
Is there anything in AWS for someone who's just kind of like an interested amateur?
Absolutely. And that's what's so exciting about AWS. It's not just for these big corporations. It's a tool that anyone can learn to use. Remember, we were talking about you loving photography.
Yeah, all the time. I'm always taking pictures.
Well, with AWS, you could create your own platform for storing, managing, and even sharing your photos.
Oh, wow.
It's like building your own personal Flickr or Instagram,
Right.
but with the power and security of AWS behind it.
Oh my gosh, I never even thought of that. But it makes perfect sense. Instead of like relying on these third-party platforms,
Right.
you could create your own customized solution.
Exactly.
This is what I love about our deep dives. Like, we start with this seemingly complex topic,
Right.
like AWS, and by the end, you've broken it down into something so tangible and applicable to, like, my everyday life.
Yeah. Well, and that's the key takeaway here. Like, yes, AWS can seem intimidating at first,
Yeah.
but it really is just a tool.
Okay.
And it's a tool that can empower anyone to bring their ideas to life.
Well, I love that.
So whether you're a seasoned developer or you're just starting to explore the world of tech, there's a place for you in this AWS ecosystem.
That's so inspiring. So, to all our listeners out there, if this deep dive has piqued your interest even a little bit, I highly encourage you to check out the full AWS tutorial on Geeks for Geeks. It's a fantastic resource for taking your understanding to the next level.
Absolutely. And remember, every expert was once a beginner.
That's very true.
So don't be afraid to dive in, experiment, and see where your curiosity leads you. You might just build the next big thing.
I love that. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. What would you create if you had the power of AWS at your fingertips? Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.